When I returned home that afternoon, the house felt strangely quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, the kind that makes your chest tighten before you even know why. I dropped my keys on the hallway table and called out, "Grandpa?" No answer. The living room smelled faintly like old coffee and lemon polish. Sunlight poured through the curtains, painting long gold stripes across the floor. That's when I saw him. My grandfather was lying flat on the hardwood. For a split second, my brain refused to understand what my eyes were seeing. "Grandpa." I ran to him, my knees hitting the floor so hard it stung. His face looked pale, almost waxy. My heart started pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. I was already reaching for my phone, already imagining ambulances and hospital lights. Then his eyes opened. Completely awake. He grabbed my wrist with surprising strength and pulled me closer. "Victoria," he whispered urgently, his breath warm against my ear, "lie down next to me. Quickly. And don't breathe too loud." I froze. "What?" "You'll understand when your father comes in." Something in his voice, calm but terrified, made my stomach twist. I didn't ask another question. I lay down beside him on the cold floor, staring up at the ceiling fan as it spun slowly above us. My heart hammered so loud I was sure someone could hear it through the walls. Then 2 minutes later, the front door opened, and my father walked inside. The front door closed with a slow, deliberate click. From where I lay beside my grandfather on the hardwood floor, I could hear my father's footsteps moving through the hallway. Each step sounded careful, almost rehearsed, like someone trying not to disturb a sleeping house. My lungs burned from holding my breath so shallowly. Grandpa's fingers tightened slightly around my wrist. A silent warning. The footsteps stopped outside the living room. For a moment nothing happened. Then my father walked in. From the corner of my eye I could see his shoes first. Dark leather, polished, the kind he wore to work every day. He didn't rush to Grandpa's side. He didn't call for help. He just stood there, watching. The air in the room felt thick, heavy with something I couldn't name. I kept my eyes half closed, forcing my body to stay completely still. Seconds passed. Then my father exhaled slowly. "Well," he muttered under his breath, his voice flat, almost disappointed. That took longer than I expected. A cold ripple moved through my chest. He stepped closer. I heard the faint rustle of his jacket as he leaned down. My grandfather didn't move. Neither did I. My father stayed there for another moment, studying the two of us lying on the floor like lifeless mannequins. Then he said something so quiet I almost missed it. "Guess the old man finally did it." My pulse thundered in my ears. And just as my father began reaching for his phone, my grandfather's grip on my wrist tightened again. As if the real test hadn't even started yet. My father's phone unlocked with a soft click. From the corner of my eye, I watched his shadow stretch across the floor as he stood over us. My chest rose so slowly it almost hurt. Then he spoke into the phone. "Yeah, it's done." His voice was calm. Too calm. Pause. No ambulance," he continued quietly. "He's been declining for months. It'll look natural." My stomach twisted. The way he said it, like he had already rehearsed the story, made the room feel colder than the hardwood beneath my back. Another pause. "Yes. Tonight," he said. "Once the paperwork's signed, the house transfers automatically." House. My throat tightened. This house had belonged to my grandfather for nearly 50 years. Every corner held memories. The creaky staircase, the kitchen window where he fed birds every morning, the porch swing where he used to tell me stories when I was little. And my father was talking about it like a transaction. He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. For a long moment he simply stood there again. Then he crouched beside my grandfather. I felt the shift of air when his hand hovered over Grandpa's chest, checking for movement. I forced my body to stay still. My father sighed quietly. "Well," he murmured almost to himself, "this will make everything easier." He began to stand again. But just before he could take a step away, my grandfather suddenly squeezed my wrist. Once, twice. A signal. And for the first time since I lay down beside him, I realized this moment wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning of whatever he had planned. My father's footsteps moved toward the kitchen. The refrigerator door opened with a soft hum. A glass clinked against the counter. Ice dropped into it with small, sharp cracks. Beside me, my grandfather finally let out the faintest breath. Not yet, he whispered so quietly I barely heard it. I kept staring at the ceiling fan, counting its slow rotations to steady my racing heart. The air smelled like dust and lemon cleaner, the same scent that had filled this house for as long as I could remember. But now it felt different. Like the house itself was holding its breath. In the kitchen my father poured something into a glass. Liquid glugged slowly from a bottle. He didn't sound sad. He sounded relieved. That realization hurt more than anything else. A few seconds later his footsteps started back toward the living room. My grandfather's fingers tightened around mine again. Victoria, he breathed, barely moving his lips. When he kneels down again, don't react. I swallowed. My pulse pounded against the side of my neck. The footsteps crossed the hallway. Then my father reappeared in the doorway. I heard the quiet clink of ice in his glass as he stepped closer to us, stopping only a few feet away. For a moment he said nothing. Then he crouched again beside my grandfather, lowering himself slowly until I could feel his presence right next to us. The ice shifted softly in his drink. And then, in a voice so calm it sent a chill down my spine, my father whispered, "Strange thing about timing, Dad." He took a slow sip. "Sometimes people die exactly when you need them to." The ice in my father's glass shifted softly as he stood up again. I heard him walk to the dining table and set the drink down. A chair scraped across the floor, followed by the creak of wood as he sat. Minutes passed. Long, suffocating minutes. My arms were beginning to ache from lying still, but my grandfather hadn't released my wrist. His grip was steady, patient, like someone waiting for the exact right moment. Across the room my father was moving papers. I could hear the quiet shuffle of documents sliding across the table. Then the sound of a pen clicking. "Let's make this official," he muttered. The words made my chest tighten. Another chair creaked as he leaned forward. "This house should have been mine years ago," he said to himself, his voice low and bitter. "All that stubborn pride. For what?" A page turned. "Once this is signed, everything transfers clean." My stomach dropped. He wasn't grieving. He was preparing. A drawer opened. I heard the faint metallic rattle of something being pulled out. Probably the family stamp Grandpa used for legal papers. Then my father stood up again. His footsteps came closer. Slower this time. He stopped right beside my grandfather. For a moment the room was silent except for the ticking clock on the wall. Then he bent down close enough that I could feel the warmth of his breath. "Well, Dad," he murmured quietly, "I suppose this is goodbye." And just as his hand reached toward my grandfather's chest again, my grandfather's fingers suddenly released my wrist. For the first time since I lay down beside him, he moved. My grandfather's chest rose slowly. Then his eyes opened. Fully. For a split second my father didn't react. It was like his brain refused to process what he was seeing. But when Grandpa sat up, the glass slipped from my father's hand and shattered on the hardwood. Ice scattered across the floor. "What the?" My father stumbled backward, his face draining of color. My grandfather didn't rush. He pushed himself upright with the calm, careful movements of someone who had planned every second of this moment. Then he looked straight at my father. "Good afternoon," he said quietly. The silence that followed felt enormous. "You were," my father stammered. "Dead." Grandpa finished gently. I slowly sat up too, my legs trembling as the blood rushed back into them. My father's eyes darted between the two of us. Confusion. Panic. Something else. Grandpa stood, brushing dust from his sweater. "You always did underestimate patience," he said calmly. My father's voice sharpened. "What is this supposed to mean?" Grandpa didn't answer right away. Instead he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small black device. A recorder. My father's breathing changed instantly. Every word he'd said. Every phone call. Every quiet confession in the living room. It had all been captured. Grandpa held the recorder up between them, studying my father's pale face. Then he said something that made the room feel suddenly terribly quiet. "Victoria and I didn't lie down to fool you." His eyes were steady. "We lay down to hear the truth." My father stared at the recorder like it was something alive. For the first time in my life he looked small. You set me up?" he whispered. Grandpa shook his head slowly. "No. I gave you a moment to reveal who you really are." The room felt heavy with everything that had just happened. I looked at my father, the man who raised me, and realized the truth had been hiding in small moments for years. Grandpa placed the recorder on the table. "No lawyers tonight," he said quietly. "No papers." Then he looked at me. "Victoria, the house isn't the important thing." I swallowed hard. "What matters," he continued softly, "is that today you finally saw the truth." No one spoke for a long time. The late afternoon light had shifted across the living room floor, the golden stripes from the curtains now touching the broken glass near my father's feet. The house felt different, like something hidden inside it had finally been exposed. My father looked from the recorder to my grandfather, then to me. For years I had believed he was simply strict, distant, always chasing work and responsibility. But now I saw something else in his eyes. Not anger. Fear. "You'd really destroy your own son over a misunderstanding?" he said quietly. Grandpa sighed and walked to the dining table where the unsigned papers were still lying. "This was never about destroying anyone," he replied calmly. He folded the documents and set them aside. "It was about truth." My father didn't pick them up again. He just stood there staring at the floor where the ice had melted into small puddles. The silence stretched between us like a bridge that had finally collapsed. Then Grandpa placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. And in that quiet moment I realized something that would stay with me forever. Sometimes the most valuable inheritance isn't a house. It's the truth you finally see inside the people you love.